Thank you. It is such an honor to be back here in the great state of Florida. I actually have been here a number of times over my career working on the Florida State Assessment, way back in the day with my friend Vince Vergis over here, who will be on the panel later today. But before I get started, I wanted to tell you a quick story about how someone could actually love testing, because most of you probably in this room do not love to take tests. Let's be honest. Is there anyone in here that actually loves testing or likes to take tests? We've got a couple of souls over here, but there's not many of us. It's the kind of job when your neighbors ask you what you do for a living, you make up something else, and you don't say that you make tests for a living because nobody will like you if they find out that you make tests for a living. But my joy of tests actually started in 1981 when I was a second grader at a Spencerport Elementary School in Spencerport, New York, and we were learning our multiplication tables. And Mrs. Furman said that anyone who could do their multiplication tables with proficiency in this certain amount of time, going through and writing them all out, could have a pizza party with her at her house. And I was a teacher lover. I was a teacher lover from the time I entered school. And so I didn't really care so much about the assessment, but the mechanism that allowed me to have a pizza party at Mrs. Furman's house was to be able to do my multiplication tables in 60 seconds or whatever the case was. And that earned me a seat at her house in 1981 having a pizza party in a beautiful June day in school. My love for testing continued as I worked up the grades. And in 8th grade, I am a product of the New York State Regents exams. Anyone in here from New York State? Look at all these New Yorkers that took the Regents exams. My love continued then. So now fast forward, now I'm in 8th grade. I'm taking course 1, which is the Algebra 1 course. And it was a very similar thing. Now this time, the teacher said, anybody that gets a perfect score on the New York State Regents exam can go out for a steak dinner with me. So again, being the very competitive person that I was, it wasn't the test really that turned me on, it was the outcome of what do I get if I get to perform at a certain level. And to be able to have a steak dinner with my teacher was just a dream come true. So I earned that. I was able to accomplish that. And that was the start of where my love of testing came from. And when I was in college and I was a psychology major and I took a test and measurement class and took a statistics class, and I thought, oh my gosh, this data is magnificent. This is the study that helps you to understand how students learn, and it's information that people can learn about themselves, about what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. And that's amazing. Like, tests should be a day of celebration. And I will tell you, as a mother, when my daughter was in 1st grade, it was one of those like take your parent to work day. So like if you were a police officer or an attorney or a nurse or whatever, my daughter Angelina, who's now a senior, got to take her mother to school, and I was a psychometrician. So if you can imagine, I'm sitting on the floor with a bunch of 1st graders. We're sitting, crisscross applesauce, and I asked them, has anybody ever heard of what a psychometrician does? And they looked at me like, what? What is a psychometrician? I said, well, I get to make tests for a living, which means that I get to assess what your teachers are teaching you in school, and I get to give you information about what you're really good at, and I also get to give you and your parents information about things that you might be struggling with so that you can learn to get better. Isn't that really cool? And they were like, yay, that's awesome. And then one of the other kids that had an older sister said, oh, Mrs. Gardner, I'm kind of scared because here in Texas, we have to take the Texas STAR assessment, and it's terrible. It's a really scary thing. And I said, oh no, it's not scary. No, if you go in and you go in and you know what the purpose of it is, the purpose is to get information. And I asked that little girl, I said, tell me, when you're feeling sick and your mom or dad takes you to the doctor, like, why do you go to the doctor? Oh, well, so I can learn what's wrong with me so I can get better, right? I'm like, that is what the purpose of assessment is as well. It's a way to learn more about yourself. We learned this morning from one of the panelists about the purpose of a classical education is to become more human and figure out what your strengths are, right? But to also identify where you might have some areas where you need to to develop more, in order to do better. That's what testing is supposed to be about. And I can guarantee you there's not one psychometrician in the world that would tell you that a test is supposed to do everything that people are hanging their hats on it to do today. A test is one piece of evidence that, taken collectively, builds a beautiful mosaic of information that teachers can use in order to evaluate where their students are doing well and where they may need some extra attention. So my goal in this presentation is to make you see a little bit more behind the curtain of what a summative assessment is and how it can be actually a very useful tool in classical education. So we learned this morning, making sure I'm on the right slide here, we learned this morning, most of you know this, but I know there's a few of you in the room that are new to classical education, is that we value the education of the heart, the mind, and the soul. And if the education does that, why would we not want the assessment to do the same thing? So when we look at the mission and purpose and emphasis and goals of what a classical education is all about, building a well-rounded, holistic education that develops the whole person, why would we not want to put content in front of people that does the same thing, so that when they're actually taking the assessment, it's not separated from what goes on in the classroom, it's directly connected to what they're doing in the classroom. So looking back over the history of time of what the purpose of an education is, we can learn from Plato, we can learn from Frederick Douglass, we can learn from Dr. Martin Luther King. But what we're finding now in mainstream educational classrooms all around the world is that there's the tests that are used to measure what classically educated students are doing are so radically different that it's not complementing. And what we've tried to do at CLT is do a complete interplay between the curriculum with the instruction and then how the student is assessed. And I'm excited to have Carrie Eben, who'll be coming up here for our panel in a little bit. She wrote a series of 3 blog posts that resonated with me. And one of her quotes was that the assessment practices must align with the purpose of education. And I could not agree with that statement more. So what we've tried to do at CLT is create an assessment that is complementary to the type of education that you're giving to your students. Now, we know that the pedagogical strategies that are used in classical classrooms don't look like a multiple choice test. We know that. We know that you're using Socratic discussions and that your students are memorizing poetry and that they're doing drama plays and things like that. We know that there is an interchange of ideas between student and tutor and that they're doing a lot of writing. And we love that. That's what we want assessment to be. That is true assessment in a classical classroom. This promotes deep critical thinking and problem solving and effective communication. And assessment in classical education should also include seminaring and debating and providing proof and evidence and communication and mastering of writing. I'm a classical education mom, and I want my students doing all of those things. But you know what? I also want them to get a valid and reliable assessment that can be done in one classroom period in a couple of hours and give me information to make sure that the things that they're doing on a daily basis shows that they're learning how to read, that they're learning how to analyze, that they're learning mathematics and writing skills and the such. And frankly, the kind of dialogue that goes on in Socratic discussion can't do what a standardized test does. They're different. They're different by design, and they should be. And so a great assessment program brings in evidence from a variety of sources, from the engagement of the student in class. My students, my kids that go to a classical school, they get evaluated on their curiosity and sense of wonder. That's 25% of their grade. Curiosity and sense of wonder, and it's measured by how they ask questions in class, how they interact with other students in class. They do a lot of writing, they do a lot of projects, they do a lot of poetry memorization where they present in front of the class. All of those things are part of it, but they also, as a mom who loves psychometrics and data, by the way, as I mentioned earlier, I also want to know how are they doing against other kinds of kids, not just kids in my school, but how are they doing globally? How do they compare to other students in other kinds of school? And an assessment that is a summative, standardized end-of-year assessment can do just that. So before I give, sorry, it's not moving on. There we go. Before I give a little bit more information about our lower grade assessments, I just want to quickly highlight these three main purposes of assessment. The formative assessment, that's your day-to-day assessment that you do as teachers. That's where you're gaining information from your kids to make sure that the learning is actually happening, and you're identifying misconceptions, monitoring progress, and adjusting instruction. That's being done every single day in the classroom. And we at CLT argue that that should continue to be done every day. And that's where the best, most richest assessment comes. The interim assessments, these are going to be the kind of assessments that are maybe given at the end of the quarter, maybe at the end of a unit, where you're assessing sort of the acquisition of knowledge over a certain amount of skills that were taught in a certain time period. And that should continue to take place as well. The space that CLT wants to play in is that summative space at the end of the year, where now you've gone through, you've done all this beautiful interactive instruction through the curriculum, and now you want to get a very quick and accurate estimate of how well your students are doing. Now, I see a lot of you are wearing glasses. When you go to the doctor, to the eye doctor, the machine that just blows my mind the most is when I put my eyes up to it, in about 30 seconds, it spits out this paper that tells the doctor, Tracy is about a +3, like give or take. And then you go into the room and it does the better, worse, so that we can get like the exact prescription we need. CLT is that machine. Now, we can't do it in 30 seconds. We still have to ask a variety of questions to measure a whole bunch of skills. But within a couple of hours, we're giving you that assessment that shows how well your student is reading, what kind of writing skills, how are they doing with grammar, how are they doing with basic mathematics, and how are they doing with logic and reasoning and word problems and things like that. And when you think about the hundreds, if not thousands of hours that students spend in a classroom in a given year, why would we not want to spend 2 hours to get a common metric that's valid and reliable, that gives us a point-in-time estimate of how our students are doing against what we measure and how we compare to other students? Now, I'm arguing today that there is a need for a new standardized summative assessment. The current ones that are on the market are not tailored to the kind of education that you're giving your students. There's a lot on the market, and they're almost all aligned to the Common Core state standards, which is a national set of standards that have been imposed upon the states. And we want to be able to build the kind of assessments that's targeted to the curricular targets that you believe in. So our assessments for grades 3 through 6 are designed to encourage deep thinking about great ideas from literature, history, philosophy, science, mathematics, and the arts. And it consists of 2 verbal reasoning sections and 2 mathematics reasoning sections. And they're given on paper because we've heard from our users that most of our users don't necessarily want a lot of technology in front of their students. Now, computer-based tests will come for 3 through 6, but this year we really wanted to focus on the paper so that it's a very humane experience for our kids. So the verbal reasoning sections measure a student's ability to comprehend and analyze complex texts that are sourced from classic children's literature, poetry, fairy tales, fables, and historical fiction, as well as nonfiction sources representing history, civics, and the arts. The questions are on reading comprehension and analysis skills, such as main idea, structure, themes, point of view, supporting arguments, finding details, and grade-appropriate vocabulary and context, as well as grammar skills and spelling, punctuation, capitalization, word morphology, parts of speech, and sentence structure. We have a very comprehensive content guide that lays all of these skills out in detail. So we're not dictating to you what you should do. What we're doing is pulling back the curtain and showing you what we measure. And as a school, you evaluate what your curriculum is against what we say we measure. And if we're a good fit for you, then we want to be your partner. If you look at those sets of skills and they don't look like the kind of things you're teaching, that's not going to break our heart. We'll feel a little sad for the kids in your school, maybe, but it won't break our heart. But at least we're being very honest about what we measure. It's a 50-page document that shows all of that information. Now, moving on to quantitative reasoning sections, there's 2 of these. The first section focuses more heavily on traditional mathematical content, skills in number sense, operations, measurement, and properties of shapes, for example. whereas section 4 focuses more heavily on the reasoning, the abstract sort of skills, including logic and word problems, and mathematical and geometrical reasoning. We had to look at a variety of curricular documents to give us wisdom in which way to go. In this room today, there are classical Christian schools, there are classical charter schools, there's traditional charter schools here, there's homeschoolers here, there's liberal arts Catholic schools here, and so on and so forth. And across those different curricula, there are some common rocks or tenets in common, but there are some things that are different. And what my team did was try to look across those various curricula and identify the things that are the same or similar across those curricula, regardless of what type of school that you had. And we have documented all of those things in our content frameworks. These are the major curricula we looked at, although we looked at many more. But we looked at the Trivium. We looked at Core Knowledge by E.D. Hirsch. I'm a huge E.D. Hirsch fan, by the way. I learned about his work from Pondicio, from his book, How the Other Half Learns. That was my 2018 vacation reading, and I became a huge fan of Robert Pondicio after reading that book. Singapore Math, the Spelling Workout, and Rod and Staff English was sort of our primary text that we used, but we did supplement with a variety of others through the interaction of teachers that helped us to develop this work. I am a big believer in teachers. As I told you at the very beginning, I was that student that wanted to be at my teacher's house, that would do whatever it took to be able to have that pizza party or that steak dinner with my teacher. And I have always loved teachers my entire career. Being able to be a psychometrician that could go talk to teachers about data on how items were performing was the dream job for me, because I got to be with teachers every single summer. And that love and passion for teachers still hangs true today. So we brought teachers in from all around the country to help us to develop this. Last summer, we brought in experts. We had to do it via Zoom, given the pandemic and funding and with everyone being everywhere, but we reviewed the curricula and we developed individual skills for grades 3, 4, 5, and 6 for both of the content areas. Then we developed a vertical articulation panel to make sure that the standards made sense, or the skills we were trying to measure from 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6 made sense. And after we were done with all of that, we sent it out for public comment. So many of you in this room probably received the email from us that basically listed everything that we were wanting to assess to make sure that we were assessing the right things and that we hadn't missed anything. And then finally from there, we developed the content framework, the test blueprints, the item and test form specifications, the item development plans, the field test plan, the test maps, the psychometric specifications, and the scoring and reporting features. So it has been a tremendously busy year for us. I want to highlight a couple of different scores we're going to report because I think this is one of the differentiators that makes us different maybe from some of the other assessments. My friend Bianca, where is she? There she is. Bianca is one of the angels that has helped contribute to all of this work. She's at a classical school here in South Florida, and she has spent endless nights working through this with us, with my team, talking about not only the items, but what we should measure, how we should measure it, what we should report. And in talking with her, we realized, and others, that there's a difference between how students do on achievement level type skills or academic like skills that they learn in a classroom versus the higher order thinking skills that goes beyond the classroom. So we will be giving separated scores for those achievement scores versus the reasoning scores. Similarly, this is the one I really wanted to highlight Bianca on. She talked about the fundamental versus the secondary skills. The fundamental skills are going to be those basic skills that all students must master in order to be successful in the next grade. They are the building blocks for the more advanced learning, and these are both within reading, grammar, and mathematics. So if you've got a student that's struggling in fundamental skills, that's a student that we need to go back to the basics and make sure that they're getting what they need to get in those foundational skills in order to be successful in the next grade. Versus a student who might be doing perfectly fine in fundamental skills, and maybe they're struggling more on the secondary skills. So these are the more advanced skills that build upon those. The kind of tutoring or additional support you have to give to a student who's only struggling in secondary skills is different than the kind of information you have to give to kids who are struggling with fundamental skills. And with so many classical schools opening up all over the country and you're getting all these new kids in who are coming from everywhere, if you can assess this on day one to see where they are, that can help you place your students where they need to be or what additional supplements they need to have. So huge shout out and kudos to my friend Bianca, who helped us figure out that we wanted to separate those kinds of things out. Due to time, I'm just going to keep moving on. I want to show, please look at this beautiful sample test. We've got examples out there for you. This is not a live test that students will take. This is just a sample, but the live tests are being printed as we speak. We finished grades 3 and 4. We're finishing up grades 5 and 6 right now. I wouldn't be surprised if Bianca would be looking at grade 6 tonight, because it just came in a few days ago and we're finalizing it before it goes to print. And finally, before I close out and bring up the panel, I just want to share some information about scores. The scores, the product that we make, yes, we make a test, but what we really make is information. We produce information about what students know and where they may need some additional help. So the scores is actually what we sell. So I want to talk a little bit about what you're going to see on your score report. There's going to be criterion reference information, which compares a student against a set of skills or standards that you're intending to measure. So there will be scaled scores for the verbal reasoning and quantitative reasoning sections, for the fundamental skills versus the secondary skills, and for the academic versus the reasoning skills. Collectively, this together should give you a nice high-level picture of how your students are performing. We're also going to give you raw scores and percent correct on skills that sort of go down the hierarchy. So for the domains, the subdomains, and various skill clusters, you can go much deeper. So instead of just seeing the verbal reasoning scaled score, you can also see how are they doing on spelling, or how are they doing on orthography, those kind of things, so that you can get that more detailed information. We're also going to give you normed reference information so you can see how your students are comparing to other students in the CLT population. And then I think one of the best parts that we're doing is we're giving you external validity information to let you know how your students are doing on other kinds of scales that matter. Many of you are familiar with lexiles and quantiles. This is a vertical scale developed by an organization called Metametrics, and they test more than 25 million students a year in their various assessments. They don't make any assessments. What they market is their scale, but their scale is embedded within most assessments that are on the market. So you'll be able to see your students' lexile, which is a measure of reading ability, and quantiles, which is a measure of their mathematics ability. And one of the things that there we go. One of the things you're going to get from that is we will tell you on the score report, like say you're 6th grade and your lexile is say 1,000. We'll tell you, that means that you're perfectly leveled to read books like Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, or Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis. So we're going to give you a book list that's targeted to students at that level. And if you want more, you can go look on the Lexile website and get access to hundreds of thousands of additional books. But we've created a curated book list based on your student score on what books that they are available for. Just one more slide before I bring up my panel. We are so proud and excited to pilot this assessment this May. The purpose of this test, of the pilot test, is to ensure that all of the test questions accurately measure the skills that are outlined in our content framework, and that they're an appropriate level of difficulty, and that they measure what they're supposed to measure. Schools and co-ops will receive a comprehensive score report, and they'll be able to get their lexile and quantile scores as well. So in closing, a true education inspires, and we at CLT believe that a test should be no different.